Good evening and welcome to the Accounts Review Subcommittee meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 1st, April Fools. The time is 5:37, 7 minutes behind. I'll call this meeting to order by establishing a quorum. Mrs. Sullivan. Here. Mr. Gomes.
Here.
Mr. Vega.
Here.
Ms. Oliver.
Here.
Ms. Azak.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
And the superintendent and myself as president, Tony Rodriguez, the chair. In addition to attending this, public can view this meeting via television and Comcast Channel 8, 1071 HD version, and online via this link, www.youtube.com, TheBrocktonChannels. We've established a quorum, and we will be discussing the second review of the community school purchase orders. First viewing was on 2/25. I did send out an email, actually a group text to everybody that the last accounts review, everybody did receive these unpaid invoices for your review, and any questions that you had relative to those expenses to actually send that prior to this meeting to the superintendent so that she could have questions answered for you in a timely fashion. Other than that, I will hand the floor over to the superintendent. Thank you.
Yes, so I don't have any additional information. Again, these are the invoices that we would like to go ahead and approve to pay, so this committee would approve them. However, as I mentioned, we will not be providing invoices in this way again. We have closed these credit cards, and we will be going through appropriate procurement procedures for our community school programming. So this is just to sort of clean up what had already been done.
Questions by any members? Ms. Azak?
Thank
followed by
you.
Mrs. Sullivan.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I apologize, I wasn't here at the last meeting. I was at a work conference. So just, I went through the invoices, and I just had a couple of questions, just basic questions on, so I understand the community schools has the snacks for the students. So I apologize if you have to repeat the same info, but do they actually cook food? Because I looked at some of these invoices, and there's chicken and...
Yes.
Okay.
So we are going to be, they do have a no-bake program, and they also do, I've visited some of the programs where they actually are cooking. However, we are going to have to change the curriculum moving forward because some of the purchases that we have made in the past, while easy to make from a grocery store, are not easy to make in bulk, or not easy to procure, through the appropriate processes. And that's why you see a lot of teachers don't generally use perishable items. They don't use some of the items that you may have seen receipts for. And so it does not just mean a change in business and how we do the procurement, but it also does mean a change in how we are going to be handling lessons and curriculum. And just like teachers are sort of, they have certain guidelines and parameters and guardrails based on what they do and do not have access to in their classroom, and what they are and are not able to order, the same process is going to be the case in community schools.
So, obviously it makes sense to order in bulk. I saw paper goods, utensils, things like that. So that just makes more sense to have those purchased in bulk. This might be a little off topic, but where I saw it's not just snacks and drinks, but food being prepped. Are they using the kitchens to prep this? And do they have someone ServSafe certified doing this cooking, where I don't want to open a can of worms, but we just need to make sure that, do they have someone from Chartwell's working with them, or
They do not.
where are they prepping the food? Is it on site in our kitchens?
So I actually don't know the answer to these
Okay.
questions. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But I'm happy to get back to you. What I can say from what I've observed, and I've only observed a small portion of this programming, is that they were using, like a toaster oven. They were using some basic, supplies. I think, I don't know if it's called a hot plate, but they had some basic equipment. But I actually don't know, but I do think, again, this sort of speaks to the fact that processes are going to need to change for those exact reasons. And
Okay.
so we will see, and those who go to the community schools after school, we'll see sort of changes in some of the programming, changes in some of the lessons coming out of the program moving forward.
Okay, if we can just make sure that at least serve safe certified if they're cooking actual food and not prepackaged snacks and drinks. Because this is obviously not a program that, we have it, but it, it looks like there's going to be more oversight moving forward. So I appreciate that. But no, I was flipping through and I was just like, okay, I know the prepackaged, which makes sense, the snacks, but I just questioned the actual cooking of the food, more like a meal. But
I would say even for the snacks, we have food services. So these are all things that we think need to be streamlined. And so I think this kind of begged a lot of questions that needed to be answered. And again, this program was certainly running as it has always run. They were not doing anything, with any kind of malicious intent. However, as we know in a lot of our different departments, things need to change moving forward. And I think they're on board with the new changes and how things have to, how they have to sort of pivot the programming, the lessons, and, abide by the procurement.
great, thank you so much.
Ms. Sullivan?
I don't think, this is just the community schools one, so mine was on a different,
It was.
okay, because I sent my question to you.
Which I appreciated, you sending it ahead of time. But yes, I had only asked for questions ahead of time for this specific one, only because I knew I wouldn't necessarily be able to answer them and may want to invite but I actually, that was still helpful because I was able to get your answer, so I'll answer that on the next item.
Oh, on the next one?
Yeah, on number 4.
Number 4, okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Do we have any further questions? Mr. Vega?
You, Dr. Tihiani, you mentioned at the beginning of this session, you said, this will be the last time we see invoices like this. Can you remind us what should we expect going forward?
So, going forward, you probably wouldn't, well, we're working on the warrant system, right? So you're going to be seeing a different process moving forward where you would see not necessarily all of this. Actually, you may. So it's hard to talk about what you all will see because we haven't even done that process yet. But that being said, it is a process you need to see. So you would be seeing these kinds of documents with receipts and backup when we get to that place. What you wouldn't be seeing, though, is purchases from like Shaw's and purchases on credit cards. So that you wouldn't be seeing, but these same kinds of documents you would be seeing with like, here's, an invoice after it. You would see that once we get to that point. So hopefully, you will hopefully see that soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions by any of the members? That being said, I will entertain a motion for approval or disapproval of community school purchase orders.
Motion to approve the discussion and second review of community school purchase orders. First
Second.
viewing was 2/25/25.
Motion was made by Mrs. Sullivan and properly seconded by Mr. Gomes. A show of hands. It's unanimous, it passes. Next is discussion of unpaid bills.
Yes, thank you. So back in the fall, I had brought to you several bills that I believe amounted somewhere in the amount of $260,000 of unpaid invoices that needed to be cleared out from previous fiscal years. My understanding at the time was that, we were clearing that out and that this would not be a problem that would continue. However, that is what you see before you. I do want to handle this differently, however, than the way I handled it back in the fall. We were still cleaning up. It was still a process at that point, but these are all invoices that we have received since that time, which means we received them after November for fiscal year '24, fiscal year '23, and as you see on here, fiscal year '22. So I wanted you to have eyes on all of these, and however, I would actually recommend that these not be approved by the committee. The reason I am recommending that is because they are falling outside of this fiscal year. And similar to, the city auditor earlier this year was kind of like, at some point, you gotta cut it off, right? You gotta say no. And I think we have already hit that point. To the city auditor's point earlier this year, we had not done appropriate contracts or procurements for a lot of the bills, and that's why we hadn't paid this year's bills. And so now we're going through that process. But if you go backwards, there were also not appropriately executed contracts there. So that means they would not be able to come after us and recoup these funds, because there was not an appropriately executed contract. So there are a few of these that could potentially be exceptions, but what I am proposing is that we deny these for now. We have a deeper conversation with any vendors who may want to come and ask again, where we talk about when the invoice was sent, why it was sent late. I would say for anything FY '22 and '23, that's an absolute no, off the table. But in the case that you have something where services were rendered, for example, in June, the invoice says June, but we may have received it later in the summer, I do believe there's a conversation to be had there, and then I would bring that back to the committee for consideration. But at this point in time, I feel like we need to send the message that we are not simply just taking invoices anytime and paying them out. That is not a practice that we should be utilizing ever, and I think it is a message that needs to be sent to all of our vendors, and it needs to be sent to just the entire system, that invoices need to come in a timely fashion, both from the vendor to, whoever's supporting or getting the service, and then turned over to the finance office as soon as possible. So, for example, Ms. Sullivan, you had asked specifically about the last one. So that is a transportation charge that says transportation of multiple students and monitors to Downey, Barrett, and Brookfield, and that is by T&G Royale LLC. Now, those services were rendered in June, and the invoice was in June. However, we do want to look into this a little bit further because you'll see that the invoice date is before the date served. So we do think that there needs to be an audit there. Again, we want to determine when exactly this invoice came in, how late was it. So that will be a conversation that we could potentially engage and maybe bring back to you. Whereas there are some on here, as you would see, from 2023, where we will not be engaging that conversation. There are others that did have services rendered in June, but we know that we have confirmed that we did not receive the invoice until October. So that is also a no. So we're going to be taking them individually, and now we have a process by which, when any invoice comes in after the fiscal year, there's a couple things we're doing. So if one comes in, we're going to be asking when the invoice was received and by whom. We're going to be asking for backup documentation from the vendor and whoever received it on our end. We'll also be having a conversation about are we still working with this vendor in the event that late invoices may not be paid, and how's that going to work? So for example, T&G is a current vendor of ours, so that conversation could look different. And then also, what specific safeguards will we be implementing? Now, also for this upcoming end of fiscal year, we are going to be communicating with all vendors that their invoices need to be in by a certain date or they will not be paid. So we will be communicating out that date ahead of time. We will be giving them the notice that they need, so that in the future, hopefully this won't even be a conversation. But for this year, where we clearly realize there must be some invoices from other fiscal years, because we're still bringing them in, I think a longer conversation needs to be had about what happened, why it happened, and how we're going to move forward. But I think a basic denial is what I would recommend be our response moving forward for all invoices received after the end of the fiscal year.
Would it be fair for us to postpone this, or do you want an actual denial? Because if we do deny these invoices will not get paid.
Correct, and I would prefer to deny them.
All right, duly noted. Ms. Oliver, followed by Mr. Sullivan, followed by Ms. Azak.
I have two questions and a comment. So the total of $260,000, $100,000, that's the 3 years together, right, that we owe?
That was the one that we approved back in the fall. I can't remember exactly the date, but we had had a similar conversation where there were all these old unpaid invoices. I believe it was in November, where I had to come for a very similar thing. They were old from fiscal year 22, 23, and I came before you and said, okay, these are all the old invoices from old fiscal years. We've cleared them out. This isn't gonna happen again, or so I thought, right? I thought it was like the grants that we had finally cleaned up and it's not gonna happen again. However, what I did not anticipate was that there might still be vendors who are holding on to invoices or invoices on people's, I don't actually even know where these invoices are truly coming from, but that's part of the problem. So back then, when I asked for you to approve them, it was part of a giant cleanup that I thought we needed to do. But at this point, 9 months in, I feel like there needs to be some greater discernment on why these are still coming late, because that means these came in even after you approved old fiscal year invoices back in the fall.
Yeah, because I think before you started, they had also brought almost the same amount that we also denied, because it was from like 2022, 23. And we did make it very clear that, during that meeting, that the vendors need to be sending invoices on time, because we were getting bills, I think, yeah, it was before you came in, that it was like from 2022, 23, and it was almost the same amount. That's why I was questioning if those are the same invoices or new ones that has come from those years. But I totally agree with you that those vendors need to be more responsible with sending it in a very timely manner if they want to get paid. We're not trying to refuse to pay them, but they can't send invoice from a year ago, and we're trying to figure out who sent it and where, when, or whose desk it landed on. But I totally agree with you that vendors need to be a little bit more responsible sending in time if they want to get paid.
Exactly, and so what I'm asking for any of these vendors in particular is that if they are asking to be paid beyond the fiscal year 22 and 23, I say are an absolute no-go. But if it's an FY 24, to send us the backup documentation or the proof that this invoice was submitted on time to somebody on our end, that it's our mistake, and then I'm happy to bring it to you and say, okay, this was our mistake internally, we have fixed it, but right now it is so loosey-goosey and kind of, it's unclear. And just to give y'all some context, it shouldn't be happening. It doesn't happen in other districts. There are very clear cutoff dates and times. So you are well within your right to say, no, we cannot pay these bills after the fiscal year.
All set? Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, thank you. On the sheet, I'm wondering, are some of these actual reimbursements, or are they bills?
Some are reimbursements.
And we're turning down reimbursements as well?
So it depends. So there are some reimbursements on here that, again, they were submitted in November. So I'm saying at this point, yes, we need to deny them. And then they can certainly come to us and have a conversation with us about why it was late, and we can revisit. But yes, for example, if you're looking at one where the services were, like, let's see, there's a reimbursement from June, and we did not receive that invoice till October for a reimbursement. So yes, I would say that we deny that one, or I know I'm saying deny all of them, but I think that yes, that we need to have and I know for even like my own reimbursements for things, the city auditor has made it very clear we need to have it within 30 days, right? Like, so yes, I would say we deny some of these reimbursements. There are one or two reimbursements too in here that were for field trips that I'm wondering why they didn't come out of the BEF account. That would be a separate discussion to be had, but that's all to say that I don't think this should be going to the city auditor and us asking her to pay them.
Just so I understand, the item that's, it's under human resources, almost to the middle,
Yes,
the BEA medical reimbursement,
yes,
is that money coming back to the school? Is it?
no.
What-
So that's a
That is an actual
medical,
bill?
it's not through Medicaid, it's a little bit different. So I can get you the backup documentation for that, but my understanding is that was an individual that provided something, and then put in a reimbursement. I would have to get you more information.
Just to be, it's a reimbursement to a private party, not to the school?
I think that's.
Correct.
Yeah, is, because I don't, do you
There's
recognize
a-
that name?
Yes, that's a reimbursement to that individual that's listed.
Right, but is that individual
An
affiliated with this?
employee, yes.
Employee,
It's an
yes.
employee.
Of ours, though, right?
Yes. So it's probably like a medical, like, co-payment or something to that nature. And they're just asking for reimbursement, probably got injured while on duty.
It's $2,500.
No, not that one. That one, if you're talking about the
That
human
one's
resources.
$20.
VA, that's 20. That's $20.
The
Yeah.
student medical reimbursement, sorry, the
So,
student
okay,
medical
sorry.
reimbursement.
Oh, special ed? Because you said human resources, the only thing that's under human resources
Yes,
is
there's only one
individual.
on human resources, so sorry, which one are we talking about? The student medical reimbursement, yes.
Yeah, the special ed.
So that one was, the date of the invoice was July 22nd, and the city had closed its books on July 15th. The services were rendered on May 20th. So that's another one where we would have to engage the vendor or whoever provided the services.
So I'm just trying to be clear, that somebody is putting in for a reimbursement to get paid, or this is to be paid back to the school?
These ones are all different, but this one says ICCD Partners LLP, so that is an outside organization. That would not be internal, so that would be somebody we're contracting
Tim,
with.
They're requesting us to pay. So say they went and got hurt and there was a copay for x-ray and it was like $100 or $200. They put in that bill for us to pay it, to cover their bills.
So it's a reimbursement for somebody
Reimbursing
else?
to the person, not to us.
Okay.
It's not coming to us.
All right, thank you. That was a little bit unclear.
Oh, sorry.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. So I remember that meeting, Superintendent, and looking at some of these invoices coming from previous years. I mean, we do have a budget, and things need to be paid out at the end of that budget to avoid having to deal with what we've been dealing with. So I agree with holding off on some of the items with further explanation as to why. Years ago, when I was at a law firm, we would stamp the invoices when they would come in, a daily stamp. It'd have the month, date, and year as to when we receive them, because you can backdate an invoice, and there's no proof as to when you actually received it. So, I mean, is that something that we're gonna work with when they get the daily mail in that department?
So we do timestamp them when they come in hard copy, and then we have the timestamp of the email. I think what makes it a little bit difficult is the fact that so many of these are going to so many different people. And then how are they filtering through the finance office? So by the time the finance office gets them, you know, if they're timestamped, and some of these are, so we know exactly when we got them, which is why I'm saying, no, it was too late. But there are others where it's like, then we are trying to backwards sort of find an email of when the invoice was sent. So you have to email the person you got it from, where'd you get this invoice, who sent it to you, when did they send it? So basically you have to backtrack to when the vendor sent it through email. So we need to come up with a better system for sure for submitting those invoices, but at this point in time, rather than, we started going through and trying to like go backwards and figure out, okay, when was the actual date that the vendor submitted? But rather than doing that, we're putting the onus on the vendors to say, submit to us, forward to us the email that says that you sent this in a timely fashion, and then we'll have a conversation. But at this point, it is very difficult to backwards map something that, you know, where the service is, especially in 23 and 22.
Would it make sense to have a designated email address for just invoices? So they're not going to everybody, it's just going to that one designated, because I looked on here, and I'm just looking at invoices that just came in that are 2025, and they still have someone's name on here that's no longer with us. So it's easier for them, rather than have it just bebop from one desk to another, have it designated, this is where the invoices are to be sent, this is the specific, and a few
I hear
people have
where-
access.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think we do need to come up with a better system that's more centralized, but one of the other issues that we have been dealing with is the fact that we also need to verify that services have been rendered. And you, generally, the person who is on the other side of the invoice email is not going to be able to do that.
Okay.
So you do need, so for example, some of these came from the special ed department at the high school. We need them to verify first to then get it to us.
Okay.
So I think what needs to happen is we need to have a clearer path, but all of them, then they know to send them to the finance office. That's where they eventually end up. But that still doesn't solve some of these questions for the ones that are coming so much later.
No, definitely, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any further questions? Mr. Gomes, followed by Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you. I do agree with the proposal to wait and look into these. Just to clarify, so you want us to deny it, just to give you more time while you investigate some of these,
I
to
would
see what actually happened, or you just want them to not come back?
I would say deny, because we need to start denying these requests. And then if specific vendors come back and have documentation or proof that they had submitted in a timely fashion, and this is on our end, then I will certainly bring it back to you for an approval. But I would say I would prefer not to leave any gray area about us later approving these, because I think that's part of the problem, is the fact that clearly there's a perception out there that we are paying things from 2022 and 23, and I kind of want to set the stage of, no, it's not even going to be a conversation moving forward. So yes, we'll deny these, and if they, they can send old invoices at their own risk, I suppose.
Okay. And one more thing, what does it look like now as far as getting the invoices and processing them and making sure the services have been completed?
That's a great question, and it looks different in different departments, and that's what we're kind of trying to streamline. So right now, for example, I know we had added the administrative assistant position, and specifically to Unified Student Services, just to check invoices for transportation, because we were finding that some of the invoices were coming in, the students weren't accurate, or a student was absent, and then there's supposed to be a different payment, that sometimes we're being charged for a day that that school didn't have school, because these are to out-of-district placements too. So I would say that different departments handle it differently, and what we're figuring out right now is how should it be done, who does it, and then what is that process. So I think there are some departments where it's a very fluid process, there's no issue, and then others where we know it's an area of growth for us.
Okay. Do you know if we are sending any reminders to submit
Yes.
invoices? Okay.
And they were sent last year too. So something came out from the finance office that went out to all those who would receive invoices saying, send this out, remind the vendors, they need to get them in by this date. So that was done even last year. Obviously, there was a concern, and the city auditor had been very clear that she was going to close the books early, had communicated that to us, and we communicated that to our vendors.
Okay. Thank you. I'm all set.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan.
And they still didn't pay even though they got those?
Or they still didn't turn in the invoices, yes.
Okay. Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay, so that wasn't really my question, but on the one that I asked for on this list, is T&G Royal, is that a vendor?
it is. It's
Okay.
one of our private transportation vendors. And they are still a current vendor of ours. So I do believe that this is probably one I would come back to you with. But the issue with this one too is that we do need to do some verification because the invoice date is before the services were rendered.
Right.
So that one is probably the one that I would come back to you with,
Yep.
but I'll do that at a future time.
And they got a reminder and they still did it?
Everybody got a reminder. So we're wondering.
It's weird.
Now, this one could have been on us, and that's what we're still trying
Okay.
to figure out. The ones from 22 and 23, I'm pretty sure aren't on us, but I do want to be clear that, again, some of these systems haven't been perfect. So where the ownership is on us, we will certainly take it, and we will make sure it's paid. But I think that's what we're trying to figure out. That one seems more reasonable since it was just in June.
Right. Thank you.
Did I miss anybody? Oh. Mr. Vega.
You're recommending a vote for denial, not to withhold payment, but for anybody who believes that they are actually due to provide the correct paperwork to make it happen.
Correct.
And I just want to highlight it because that's an important distinction to make. We're not trying to keep anybody from getting paid for services rendered. We want to make sure they're adhering to the rules that have been established by the school and by the city. And we want to make sure that we're receiving the proper documentation. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, it's very similar to sort of what happened earlier in the year when our bills were sent back. Now we're in the position where we're sending them back and saying, no, this is, we're not paying this one either. So there are areas where, and this was actually, in all fairness, some of these were ones that had been sent back to us. And I think in the shuffle of all of the different invoices we had received, didn't even realize that some of them were for so many more older fiscal years. So they had been sent back and said, this is not even this fiscal year. So,
Any further questions by any members? Two, would this interrupt any services moving forward? Thank you, no? And the other piece is, with these invoices that are coming in, obviously it comes into different departments. Is there something that's gonna come through your office of this is the protocol for all of our department heads, managers, or is there something that the committee needs to actually implement a financial policy of, to correct this process?
no, I don't think there needs to be, because I think there are plenty of procurement policies that kind of cover us, and there are policies about spending the appropriate fiscal year on services rendered that fiscal year. So I think that sort of covers us in this situation.
So basically, our department heads are gonna be given, you got a 24-hour, 30, whatever it is, 48 hours to get this into finances and.
And we'll have a date by which all invoices need to be received, just like last year. Like the books are going to be closed on this date. All invoices need to be received by us, ahead of that.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? I'll entertain a motion. Ms. Oliver?
Motion to deny the unpaid bills for 2022, 2023, and 2024.
Second.
Motion was made by Mrs. Oliver, properly seconded by Mr. Sullivan. Show of hands. Unanimous, it passes. Thank you. The next item is discussion of the Brockton Police Department invoices.
So yes, these you also have in your packet. I just wanted to bring these forward for you to see, since they were not part of the original, budget and appropriation. So this is from the dates, as you can see, where our school police did not have their police powers, so we did have to have additional police detail. So I'm bringing them to you with a recommendation for approval to pay for those services.
Ms. Oliver, followed by Mr. Vega.
What is the total amount? Is it 10 grand?
Sorry. About 16,000, Sorry, I can add it up right now. Yeah, about 16,000.
I just had a question. Why is it being sent to us to pay when it was not us that basically made the error that this happened? Why isn't the city paying for this, knowing that they had to cover us because they did not follow the procedures in time? And we had no school police. We still had to keep our students safe, right? So I wonder why we have to pay the 16,000. It has to come out of the school department.
And we could certainly, request additional information, or I could ask that, additional questions be answered. Because, this is still an area where we don't particularly agree on how that should have happened. I think we agree on how it should happen moving forward. So I can see it both ways. I can see us saying, okay, let's just, pay it. These are the services that we had to get in order to provide, to keep our students safe. On the other hand, I can see us doing the same thing we did where we denied to make sure it doesn't happen again. So this is the will of the committee, and that's why I'm bringing it forward to you.
All set? Mr. Vega, followed by Mr. Rooms.
And this is a new area for me, so I apologize if the question is remedial. But when, it's fair to say that this particular situation was one of miscommunication, some things happened, but are there other times outside of, situations like this where we might request additional support and hire a police detail?
Absolutely, and that's budgeted for ahead of time, that there are going to be, additional police details needed throughout the year for different events and things that have been anticipated ahead of time.
So this is where my own inexperience may come into the equation. So I'm seeing on here on January 30th and on January 31st, what's described as essentially the same detail. And they're both 8 hours of work. And in one line, it's $330 in total. In the next line, it's $1,666. So it's the same detail, the same amount of hours. My question, I'm imagining that probably has to do with seniority, who's filling that. But do we have any ability to work with the city to control for, because I don't understand how we budget if there's a variance as wide as $300 for 8 hours of work and $1,000 for 8 hours of work. And to be clear, I am not saying at all that we should not be paying our officers who are doing the details. I'm just saying that I don't understand how we would budget effectively if there's that much of a variance in one detail, not to mention all the other details that are listed here.
That is a great question.
Just to answer that, so when you see that the actual amounts jump up, even though it's the same amount of hours, you have a patrolman, sergeant, lieutenant, so they vary of what they get paid versus with their contract. So where you see that big number, that's a captain. So he's getting paid, I believe, it's like $133 an hour versus a patrolman that's getting 70 or 60 an hour.
And that's the part that I suspected. But I guess my question is, I don't know if there are union rules for this, but like, is there any ability for the school to work with the city and perhaps skewed towards the lower end of the spectrum? Yeah,
So-
okay.
I would be nervous to do that only because I'm not the professional. I don't think that I'm the right person to be making that call. That being said, as far as good budgeting practices, it would be very similar to how we do for teachers who get paid on different scales, which is we use an average salary, and that's how we budget for the upcoming year, knowing that, okay, these many are going to fall below, these many are going to fall above, and it's going to end up always being around the average. So, yeah.
Mr. Gomes?
Yeah, I just had a quick question just in terms of logistics. What's the difference when it's saying traffic then school police function versus just school police function?
So my understanding is that there is the crossing guard duty and the traffic duty at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and then the actual school policing during the day. And those are covered slightly differently in the contract of how they're paid.
And typically our police officers are the ones who, okay. All right, that's it, thank you.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. So I remember that meeting, and I know one of the questions we had was, is this overtime pay or is this their hourly pay? Because even though they stepped in to help us out because we need to keep the students safe, obviously, and our police need to get their powers reinstated. But I vaguely remember that meeting, and we were questioning, is it overtime pay or is it regular pay? And I can't tell from looking at these numbers what they are, but, and I could have sworn someone was gonna look into that for us, and get back to us, given that it was an emergency and we needed to have police in place, for the few
find-
days. Yeah, it wasn't your office. I thought it was, someone else was gonna look into that for us during that meeting and just let us know, because I know someone questioned whether it was regular or overtime.
Yes, I can certainly look.
Because we shouldn't be paying overtime pay for.
To me, it looks like regular. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes we'll put like OT, and so you can tell, but I don't know for
Okay.
sure, so I don't want to answer, but that's what it looks like to me.
So everything that's here is all detail. Are you all set, Ms. Azak?
Details overtime, correct?
Detail is totally different from overtime. Overtime
it's a
is
different
time and a
pay
half.
rate?
Yes, it
Okay.
is, different pay rate. It's
So
a actual-
details a different pay rate. That was my question.
It's a higher pay rate.
Okay. given that we needed to, well, hopefully we can work with everyone and get this straightened out. Thank
Do
you.
we have any further questions?
Just one quick thing.
Before I go back to just my thoughts on this, and it's at the will of the committee, my opinion is that the onus is not on the school district because our school police officers lost their powers. It starts at the mayor's office and it starts with the police chief. They knew this was lingering. It should have been addressed in a timely fashion, and it wasn't. There's a kind of like a power struggle of who has more authority, and putting our students and staff in the city at risk isn't the way to address this issue. So when we're getting an invoice for detail, it shouldn't be a detail because we already have officers that were getting paid that didn't have police powers, and this wasn't something that's a money grab. You know, we respect our police officers, but this invoice shouldn't have been sent the way it was sent. And I think the police department, they do a wonderful job, but they still need to correct some of their processes that's going on across there. So I don't agree with this invoice. I don't support paying this. And I believe there should be some type of discussion moving forward to making sure that we're not getting an invoice like this. This isn't towards any of the officers, but it's towards the leadership that's over there at City Hall and the police department. Mr. Gomes.
Thank you. It was 4 or 5 days that we had no police officers. 4?
4.
Okay. And how did?
No 5, right? Because so it was Tuesday, Wednesday, it was Tuesday through Friday, and then they received them at a Monday night meeting? So it would have been the Monday too?
Yeah.
And how, because I see for different days, we had different numbers of officers provided. How is that determined?
I don't know. All I did specifically request additional police details. So as I mentioned at that meeting, this was at my request because I wasn't given an alternative plan for what we were doing. And I found out at, like 5 p.m. that they were losing their powers at midnight. So I requested and just trusted that, we were getting the coverage we needed. I
So
didn't want to nickel it and dime at that point because I just wanted to make sure our students were safe, and I did worry about, the loss of coverage.
So we were not specific as to how many. They
I
just
definitely
provided
wasn't.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Different days, different number of officers. Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Vega, followed by Mr. Sullivan.
To the vice chair's point, like, do we have we had the opportunity to talk to the city and the police department about these invoices before us, and what has the response been?
I let them know I would be bringing them in front of the committee for approval.
Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, my question is for clarification. During the time when our police didn't have their powers, the school police, did we pay them the regular pay?
Yes.
We paid them the regular pay plus this?
Yes, we had to.
Thank you.
All set, Ms. Oliver, followed by Ms. Azak and Ms. Sullivan. Do you have any hands up?
Just to basically to remind everybody, I was present when you got that phone call. Mr. Sullivan was also there. I think we were in the middle about to start a negotiation. And the fact that you had also, Mr. Sullivan suggested, right, to basically get detail because we had no police officer with power. So there was a conversation. And just to know at 5 o'clock that power is going to be done at midnight, and to see how fragile you are, and you're the one basically making the decision and trying to figure out how we're going to keep our kids safe the next day. Yeah, I have an issue with that because nobody was jumping the gun and basically saying, you know what, I did something wrong. Let's see how we can fix it. You were the one running back and forth, and I saw you between rooms trying to get people on the phone to see how we can figure this out. And with the help of Mr. Sullivan, and suggested that, but the fact that we're paying not only our school police, paying for all those 6 days, and now we're paying $16,000. I think maybe go half or have a more discussion how we can move forward that this never happens again. But yes, you have to suggest it because nobody else was suggesting it. How are we going to keep all the schools safe Nobody came out with a plan. You have to basically be the one to lead a school district and make sure that our kids are safe. Just to basically everybody knows that I saw you personally, what you were going through, and the stress on your face, it was uncalled for, that nobody else stepped up from the leadership to basically get this done.
Ms. Azak?
Thank you. Actually, in the superintendent's defense, this is the second year in a row this has happened. It happened prior to you getting here, so I'm sure if this happened and you were here with us in 2023, going into early 24, we wouldn't have gone through this in 25. So you do have a process in place. This is never going to happen again, but I do agree with some of my committee members. We all need to take responsibility, and we should, with the city and with the police department, split this, because we're all at fault by not making sure that the police powers were in place. And it's just, I don't think we need to take on that whole financial burden where it happened prior year. So if it didn't happen a prior year, it'd be different, but it happened a prior year that it shouldn't have happened again in 2025, prior to you, getting here. It happened prior to your administration, is what I'm trying to say. If you were aware of it.
I'm happy to take half the fault, but I'll be honest, I think that, actually, I'm happy to take half the
in all honesty, I just think that if we had known prior than hearing about this is the first time I'm hearing about it 5 p.m. the night before, you would have had time to get something in place rather than having us take on, not only did we pay our school police officers, we're taking on another $16,000 bill that was not budgeted for. And this is how we get into the situations we're getting into, is we're using money we don't have. And that's why I just think the school department should reach out and see if the other departments will work with us and even split it. But just, it's never going to happen again. I don't think it'll happen under your administration. But I just can't say never. But it just, there are things in place that we know come December, we're going to make sure by January our police have their police powers. It's going to be on the agenda with the city council, and it's calendared that we're not going to run into this again. So, but I would entertain further discussions with maybe the other departments to see if they're willing to work with us on this balance, the amount that's owed.
Any further questions? Mr. Gomes, followed by Mrs. Sullivan.
Dr. T, I kind of want to hear your recommendation as far as, can we entertain a conversation to see if they can at least charge us a regular 8-hour shift instead of detail or overtime? Or do you think it's best for us, granted funding's available and everything, pay it, but we know, and I'm hopeful that under your administration, this is not going to happen again. That's a one-time done deal.
I would be happy to pay all of it with some assurance from the city that it was not going to happen again. Because I think it's important to note that the city is the one that, provides the police powers, and I can't do that. This body cannot do that. I'm not the one who hands over to the city council the recommendation to grant police powers. These are all things that are completely outside of our control, outside of my control. And again, my understanding moving up until that point is that we had provided all of the documentation that we were required to provide, and that we were on track to have our police powers granted. I still actually have not received a clear answer on what happened and why it happened the way it did. There was a point in time when they said we needed a new MOA. Have you seen an MOA? You have not seen an MOA. So I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit, I'm being a little bit less diplomatic about this, but I think it needs to be made very clear that this shouldn't have happened the way it was, and I do not think that the fault rests on us. However, I'm happy to pick up the burden of the cost as long as there is some shared responsibility moving forward, or as long as the city is going to ensure us that they are going to make sure our police always have police powers, because I think that this was highly irresponsible, and that it should be fall under the onus and responsibility of those whose entire mission is the safety and security of our city, right? And the schools are part of that. And I think, like, I take the education of our students very seriously. I feel like, that should be the same for the entity that is meant to do that, and that this kind of thing should never fall through the cracks. I think that this was very negligent, and I'm glad that everything was okay that week, but I'm not going to lie that I was very nervous, and that would have been a bad situation. So I want some assurances moving forward on the city side that this will always be on the city council agenda in an appropriate time, that they will be granted their police powers. Because I think, too, there's a difference between, at any point in time, the chief can remove police powers for any reason. So to have all police have none of their powers at that time, regardless of what miscommunication or what document could have been missing, was inappropriate. It could have been specific to, okay, we don't have this document for this, now that hadn't been communicated, but we didn't have this document for this one school police officer, so that one we're not gonna grant police powers. But that is not what happened. All of our school police lost their police powers, and that was inappropriate and negligent. So I recommend we pay the full thing and move on, but I wanna be clear that I do not think the responsibility, I will take responsibility when we've done something wrong, but I'm going to be clear when we haven't.
Before we get to Ms. Sub, I disagree on paying this. I totally disagree on paying this invoice, because we just went through a lot of invoices from 22, 23 that hasn't paid, and we have to send that message. We have to send the message to the police chief and the police department that this should not happen again. I think this should be held off until we get our MOU signed and making sure that we have something in writing that this doesn't happen again, because I see it happening again, because politics get into of who has more authority. And we cannot do that when it comes to public safety in this city. This is on, like I said, City Hall and the police chief. That should have went to the council, because if you look at that city council agenda, you had retired officers that got appointed that day to do details, and it didn't happen. Ma'am, if you're recording, we have DCA recording, can you not please put your phone up, please? I don't know, you have your camera pointed at me, so I know, but please, don't, you're interrupting the meeting. So, you're interrupting the meeting. So, that's my take on this issue right here. I would recommend that this invoice not be paid or tabled to a further conversation. Mrs. Sullivan, the floor is yours.
Well, I agree with the superintendent. I'm with you on this. Okay. There was a disagreement between the sides involved in how the process should be done. These officers did make sure that our schools were safe, and they deserve to be paid. It doesn't have to do with your individual attacks against people. We are trying to work together. This is all taxpayer money. There's not separate city school side. It's all taxpayer money. There's no sides here. We're all trying to work together for the betterment of everybody in the whole city and the schools. Because you're trying to prove a point, it doesn't.
You're out of order. You're not here to
not
to
out of
reprimand what
order.
you're doing. Yes, you are. You're trying to reprimand. You're not here you speak on the item. Don't hear reprimanding me, because if we talk about reprimanding, we can all reprimand each other. So speak on the item. Do not personally attack, because what you're doing is attacking me. I
This
made
is
my
the
point.
item.
I made my statement on that.
This
So
is
if
the
you
item.
talk about
The
that.
committee did not get this notice that the police powers have to be renewed. The chief did explain that she did not have the discipline records of the officers involved, so she could not approve. This is between the superintendent and the chief. This information all was not given to us, so it can't be blamed on us. This is the responsibility of us to pay. These officers did do their job. Thank you.
Mr. Gomes.
Point of information, I wasn't done after Dr. Tehliani finished. But I do agree with you, and I think I was gonna follow up. So we do not have an MOU yet. How long is it gonna take for us to have that set up?
I don't know.
What does it take in order for us to get there?
My understanding is that the city and the police were working on it because it needed updates as a result of the post updates. And those were the additional, that was sort of like the new process that we had to, is the post guidelines. And just to be clear, we had provided the discipline records. We had not been notified that if we did not get this specific record, that the police powers would be removed. So that's where I think there is some disagreement. But again, the post requirements and the police powers also need to be made separate, right? Because the police powers had just been updated, and we did need to get into compliance. But we have a separate ordinance that has to do with police powers being granted here yearly. Those two things actually don't have anything to do with one another, and I want to be very clear about that. So that is not a state mandate, because the police power situation that we do here is not the same as anything else done in the state. So while we were trying to get into compliance, there was the new guidelines had come out in December. This was happening in January. If we were missing, if the school police were, or if the police department were missing any such documents, we were providing documents on a rolling basis. But there was never a communication that if a document or this specific document wasn't received, all police powers would be removed. And I still think that that was an inappropriate reaction. And so I do not know about the MOA. I'll be honest that this is a situation that, again, I'm kind of leaving in the city's hands and the chief's hands, because they're the ones who determine what that looks like and what updates need to happen for the post guidelines. So I'm just waiting on them. Our police have powers. I was told that they wouldn't have powers until that was done, but we don't have that done. The police have their powers. And so I'm still very unclear on how all of this should work moving forward. I think the system we have is clearly inefficient and leads to miscommunication and leads to areas where we are going to have interruptions in service.
Sounds like we were reactive instead of responsive. And I do agree with you. Even if we were missing any documentations, instead of just taking the powers away, hey, I'm gonna grant you an extra day to give me these documentations, there was a different response that could have been accomplished there. On the other hand, the service have been provided, regardless of, they took the powers and they gave us police officers. They did provide the service. There was an invoice. My recommendation, because I do think we should pay this, what I would recommend is that we postpone it, that we initiate the conversation to have an MOU on file with the provisions or the clause that will, someone will have to take responsibilities if it comes to, the end of the year. We are notified your police officers will not have power, to have something there that grants us police officers and it will not cost us additional money, or otherwise that we will work it out in a timely manner and have our police officers with their powers ongoing. My motion would be to postpone it, initiate the conversations, because I would love to see us having that MOU and having something in writing that provides us with reassurance and provides them with the reassurance on their end as well, that we will do our piece as far as providing documentations. Very similar to what they did, we were missing documentations, however the case, and to take police powers. We are missing the MOU. We will hold on to this for a bit longer, if that's okay. That's my take on this. This is my suggested approach. I don't know if any of the members have any recommendations, but I think we should pay it. I just think we should hold on to it, make sure we get the MOU out of the way, pay this, and then it's a settled business.
Did you put a motion?
It is a form of a motion, yes.
Before your motion, does anybody have any more comments? Just Mr. Sullivan.
I'm talking about the meeting that Anna was talking about, with the first night you got the notice that the police power was going to be taken away. And I did make the recommendation to hire a detail, but I thought it would only be one day. Once the police found out, wait a minute, there's 6 or 7 police officers that haven't got powers. Let's get them in and get it done. I figured that would happen. But my recommendation is, I agree with the superintendent. These guys worked. They should get paid, and they have to get paid. This is their job. I'm well aware that we already paid our police officers, but now we have to play for the details as well. And my recommendation is it should be paid. Thank you.
And that was the recommendation, to hold off on this until we get our MOUs and everything squared away before we entertain to actually pay this invoice moving forward. But I know Officer Mosley is in here, but correct me if I'm wrong, in order for an officer to work inside any of our schools, SROs, they have to be trained in certain things in education? Do we have any documentation that these officers are actually trained in education? I know sometimes when it comes to safety that, some things are like an emergency situation, we have to have it, but, you can't have officers working in school if they're not properly trained, even though they are fully trained.
So I think that's why this was extra police detail. I would say that Sergeant Livingston was still on duty, and he is recognized as an SRO.
Okay.
Banaka too? Yes.
All righty. Any further questions or comments by any of the members?
Yep.
Ms. Azak?
So clarification, Mr. Gomes was making, but just for clarification on the motion, an agreement to pay, but once we get the MOU and the proper procedures in place, so we do not run into this again.
Yes.
We're not saying we're not going to pay the invoices, but we just want to make sure we have the proper procedures in place, that this is taken care of and we don't run into this again. So I want a clarification just on his motion, that's all.
You
Motion.
can put the motion on the floor. Are you all set?
Yep.
Mr. Gomes?
Motion to postpone the invoice, which will be paid as soon as we have the drafted, updated, up to standard MOU signed, and with provisions to prevent this loss of power from happening again.
Second.
That's confusing, what you just said. It's because I'm hearing two different things. You're saying to pay it and then get the MOU?
No,
Or you're
to
saying do not
post-
pay it till we get the MOU?
Till we get the MOU,
Okay,
yes.
okay, so you want to reword that motion, please?
Yes, motion to postpone payment for this invoice until we have settled with the MOU.
Second.
Motion was made by Mr. Gomes, properly seconded by Ms. Oliver. Show of hands. Okay, let's do that again.
Do a roll, you got to,
All right, we'll do a roll call vote. Mrs. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Gomes?
Yes.
Yes.
Oliver?
yes.
No,
And I'm a yes. It passes.
Chair? On that motion,
Motion, Mrs.
are we going to reach out to legal so we don't drag this on, just to get, contact whoever needs to get that MOU finalized for us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Mr.
Similarly on the motion, can we expect an update, or should we leave space for an update at next general meeting or next accounts, probably general?
Next accounts will be,
I think they're the
Next month.
same date.
yep, the same day,
How far out is that? Sorry.
May.
May? Okay. No.
So we'll be having a monthly accounts review meeting. Okay. Do we have any other, do we have any other business to discuss relative to our accounts meeting? Nothing. So our next schedule will be in May, which will be the first first meeting in May. We will have another accounts, and we will start at 5:30 again. Cool. Other than that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion was made by Mr. Gomes, properly second by Mr. Oliver. Show of hands. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, guys.